welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today to kick off Monday morning. It's another dreary day in the nation's capital, but here we are.
We'll survive. How's your scooter these days, Robby?
Scootered through some puddles, had a couple near fatal accidents.
Not the perfect mode of transport for these.
My car is in the shop. I finally decided to fix some issues that were totally self-inflicted with the car. You know, pulling in and out of these cramped parking structures in DC.
Not a good idea.
You put some dings on the old girl. But here we are. CBS News said it would not have its anchors fact-check during Tuesday night's vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. Now, the network said it will be up to the opponents to fact-check each other, not the moderators. Imagine that. This is, of course, in stark contrast with the last debate earlier in September, in which ABC moderators David Muir and Lindsay Davis corrected Trump's inaccurate statements 4 times, but they did not do the same thing for Kamala Harris, even though she also made some misstatements, stoking anger from Trump and his supporters, and I would say some objective media watchers, perhaps like myself.
CBS News' decision to forego correcting the candidates is earning criticism. Political scholar Norm Ornstein posted, quote, "I spent 30 years as an election analyst for CBS. It was the gold standard for television news. Those days and their standards are long gone." Activist and writer Charlotte Clymer posted, quote, "Let's be clear about something. The only reason that CBS News is declining to fact-check the vice presidential debate is that they're terrified of Trump and his supporters retaliating for being held accountable on the candidate's relentless lying and disinformation." Now, meanwhile, with 35 days left before the election, the race is obviously speeding up in its final stretch. Donald Trump lobbed attacks against Harris, questioning the 59-year-old's mental fitness again. Let's watch.
Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way. Okay. She was born that way. And if you think about it, only a mentally disabled person could have allowed this to happen to our country. Anybody would know this.
Latest polling continues to show Trump and Harris neck and neck. But according to a scoop in Axios, Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan Elisa Slotkin said Harris is underwater there. According to 538's average of polls, Harris is up by about 2.4 points in Michigan. The latest New York Times Siena College poll has her up by just 1. The outlet further reports that according to a recording even, taken in a virtual fundraiser last week, Slotkin said, quote, "I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan. We have her underwater in our polling."
Well, let's start there and then circle back to the debate. So the problem, and I talked about this in my radar last week, is that yes, Kamala Harris is up a little bit in a lot of these states, in Michigan and Pennsylvania, but you know, I looked again at the polling going back to 2020 for Joe Biden in these states the week before the election took place. They had him up 5-6 points in Pennsylvania, 5 and 6 points. In the end, he won by 1.17 point. So even though he did win and he won these states, it was still a massive polling error in Democrats' favor.
Yeah.
If that holds, or even if it's a little less, but still an error of, let's say, 3 points, Donald Trump is going to win these states.
Yeah.
And so she's not up by enough. Again, if it's the same as now, if the polls are exactly dead on perfectly, they figured out all the kinks, and what they're telling you is real close to the final, then yeah, she is going to win. Yeah. But you can understand where the nervousness comes from, showing her in her must-win states just up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is not a partisan point. It concerns Democrats. It gives some reassurance to Republicans. And the issue, particularly in those so-called blue wall states, is not solely that the polls are wrong or have been in the past. It's that they've been wrong in a really specific way, which is they have tended to undercount Donald Trump's support very dramatically in both elections in which he has participated. You mentioned Pennsylvania. In Wisconsin, the first time around against Hillary Clinton, the polling averages had her vote share almost exactly right, but his undercounted by about 7 points. Right. anything of even vaguely that scale is going to see him be the next president. And just one final point, Robby, on the Michigan question. Of course, it is a state that a lot of people are watching closely anyway, because it has the highest concentration of Arab Americans of any state in the Union, about 200,000. And obviously, Gaza will be a pertinent issue there.
Yes, my home state, there might be a specific Michigan-centric reason why she could struggle there if there's lingering dissatisfaction. We know there is dissatisfaction with the Biden administration's policy toward Israel. Kamala has tried to reassure this aspect of the base. I don't know how well she's done at that, because she really hasn't signaled any policy differences whatsoever from Biden. You had the mayor of Hamtramck, which is this very, very heavy Arab American population in suburbs of Detroit, near where I grew up. The mayor endorsed Donald Trump, just purely as a self-evident FU to Kamala Harris. So
and Jill Stein is on the ballot in Michigan, as she is in so many other states, if people are really looking for a protest vote on the Gaza question, I think. Circling back to something we also mentioned in the introduction, what did you think about Trump blasting her purported mental capacities?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a... It's not a kind thing to say.
It's not remotely accurate.
I would not.
Say,
yes, I would not describe one's differences with Kamala Harris, and I have many, in that I don't think she's mentally unfit. I think she is not the clearest communicator ever. I don't think it has to do with
which one could also say of Trump.
One could also say of Trump. But I will say that I agree with the CBS News decision not to do heavy-handed, real-time fact-checking in the debate. We've now had 2 debates, and I think it's clear which one was handled better. The CNN debate, where they didn't... At most, Jake Tapper, I think, repeated a question once or twice when he didn't feel like the answer from, I think it was from Donald Trump, was at all geared toward that question. He said, here was my question, would you like to answer it? And then he left it to them to fact check each other. The problem with the ABC model is that, it was just too one-sided. I know, I'm sure you will say that the volume of misstatements from Trump is greater than the misstatements from Kamala Harris. But you can't say that Kamala Harris did not say anything that couldn't have been fact-checked by the moderators. She said, for instance, and this is not the biggest, most partisan scoring point ever, but she said that there were no U.S. soldiers involved in combat zones or in harm's way. That is simply not true. In fact, we had U.S. soldiers killed as a result of what's going on. So they could have interjected and said, but that's not true, and they didn't. And that's, if they're going to just do it on a one-sided way, they should remove themselves from that process.
So I disagree with you, but not maybe quite as much as you would expect. I do think that it is part of the function of journalism to try to hold people to account, to try to avoid them making obvious misstatements or stating obvious untruths. The problem about fact-checking in debates, which I think should be done, and I'm not a fan of the CBS decision, but the difficulty is people are human. They are moderating a very high-pressure moment. And oftentimes the things that they are prepared to fact-check are things that a candidate has said before that are untrue or false or misleading, which in my mind is fair enough. The problem with the Kamala Harris thing about the combat zones, they should have fact-checked that. I think I'm, fairly well up on things, and I wouldn't have known for sure that was untrue in the moment she said it, which then means as a moderator you would be in the situation of having to risk a fact check that is later proven wrong, and I think that can get dicey. I also think, to be fair to you, sometimes the fact-checking process itself can be ideologically tainted to try to minimize certain stories and maximize others.
Right, because when they get into it over Trump about whether whether crime is going up or down, that is a somewhat complicated
right.
issue. Is it down? Yes, it has gone down in recent. We're better off than when we were in the pandemic. The trajectory over like the course of human history is for crime to be down, but it also did go up for a while, and it's up still in some cities, not in others. And are we talking about murders? Are we talking about what are we talking about? It's a complicated thing. So just for them to intervene, and also I hear you on them not being confident maybe to fact check that, but they got to have people talking in their ear as we have our producers talking in our ear during this conversation.
Sure.
We have our computers in front of us. Right. We have our cell phones. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, to pay attention to what the person is saying and 3 different conversations you're having behind the scenes.
Right.
So I get it. I mean, we live a little bit of that life.
Sure.
But there could be people feeding you for directing the television production. I mean, there are people doing that, and I'm sure they're saying, "Ooh, challenge Trump." Yeah. They could say, "Challenge Kamala. Here's where." And I think. And again, if it's an interview, I agree with you. Of course, the purpose of journalism is to challenge powerful people. If it's just one-on-one between the candidate and the journalist, of course they're going to do that. I would expect that. I've wished that they would do that to Kamala Harris a little bit more firmly. But in the context of the debate, where it's really their job to do that, I think it is primarily the moderator's job to facilitate the candidates being able to do the fact-checking of each other. Maybe with some light, so if some obvious statistical falsehood gets presented, well then yes, do I have a problem with the moderator saying, well, actually, the FBI has said, according to data from this year, that whatever, the crime is down, and then you have more of a discussion about it.
I think that's fair. I worry that the CBS decision isn't driven by these principles that we were talking about in our high-minded way, but is actually driven by concern about pushback from partisans on either side. I worry that it's not this principled idea that it is up to Kamala Harris to fact-check Donald Trump and vice versa. It's actually, we don't want the trouble of people online and elsewhere taking us to task because they have complaints about our fact-checking.
Well, we've got a lot more topics to get into on Rising right after this. Stay tuned.
This unprecedented storm dropped from 10 to 29 inches of rain across the mountains, causing life-threatening floods and landslides. Unfortunately, 11 people in our state have died as a result of this storm, and tragically, we know there will be more.
That was North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper delivering a press conference Sunday after Hurricane Helene pummeled the southeastern coast of the country over the weekend. The catastrophic storm carved a 500-mile path of death and destruction. As of this taping, nearly 100 people are dead, hundreds are still missing, and some 2 million people have been left without power. Cooper said the administration approved the state's emergency declaration and funds for relief.
President Biden is set to address the disaster on Monday morning. Donald Trump blasted Biden and Kamala Harris, who happened to be in San Francisco this weekend. Here he is at a rally in Erie, Pennsylvania. Let's watch.
But they raise a lot of money from bad people, fundraising events with their radical left lunatic donors, when big parts of our country have been devastated by that massive hurricane and is underwater with many, many people dead. She ought to be here. She ought to be down in the area where she should be. That's what she's getting paid for.
Critics also wondered, where are Joe and Kamala? Former advisor to Trump, Stephen Miller, tweeted, Kamala used every available government resource to airlift and evacuate 500,000 Haitian illegals to the United States, but she couldn't lift a finger to rescue drowning Americans in Asheville. Serial Biden critic Greg Price posted, quote, the entire city of Asheville, North Carolina is underwater. The people are using Starlink to let their loved ones know they're alive. Why isn't the media talking about this? Where is Biden and Kamala? And Nick Sorter posted, quote, Asheville and Western North Carolina are underwater. Biden's at the beach. Kamala's at a fundraiser with West Coast elites. Radio silence from the White House. This is infuriating. Now, it was reported this morning by The Hill that Kamala Harris is cutting her Las Vegas trip short, returning to Washington, D.C. to meet with FEMA to discuss what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I have limited tolerance for the criticisms of it's not just Biden or Harris, but presidents or vice presidents not going to the site of these kind of natural disasters. Because I think, honestly, it's political theatre a lot of the time. There is nothing or very little substantively that can be done by whoever the sitting president happened to be, it happens to be Joe Biden, going there to North Carolina right now. Any emergency aid can be directed from Washington and funneled through the local authorities on the ground who know actually what to do with it. And the danger in a major visit from a political figure is that you then get all of the sort of accoutrements of a big political visit, Secret Service, media attention, all of that, which as often hampers the rescue and recovery efforts as it helps them. So I'm not all that enthused about those criticisms.
Yeah, I don't particularly disagree, especially if the complaint or the criticism is that, Kamala Harris is doing campaign events or whatever instead of focusing on the disaster. Well, if she goes there and visits, or Joe Biden does, I mean, that's a that's a
political thing
campaign.
too.
Yeah,
Right.
that's, what is she going to be doing but a photo op? So if you're criticizing her for doing that while the hurricane's happening, her doing it makes no difference. That's what Donald Trump is doing. You're right. There's little to it's symbolic. It might reassure some people to see their leadership at the site, as very famously we were all reassured throughout the country when George W. Bush visited Ground Zero and made his remarks. So it can be effective. But you're right, there isn't that much to do. I mean, the complicating factor, of course, is Joe Biden, more so than Kamala Harris, because he has had a very low profile really since the disastrous debate. And from stepping out of the presidential race, there are serious concerns about his mental fitness given his advanced age. It's more of a fair criticism to wonder, not that he should go down there and do some press conference, but can he speed up any process? What is he involved in? I worry about this most for the tense state of national security affairs with everything going on in the Middle East. Is he on top of it? Is he having conversations? What is he doing? Is he aware of what's going on? These are questions you don't want to have about your president.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that he has kept a very low profile. He has done some events. I was in the White House late last week when he and the Vice President spoke as he signed an executive order pertaining to gun violence. He gave, somewhat brief remarks. He seemed fine, though. But I do think that there is an argument because of the uniqueness of the current situation that Biden should be more at liberty to go to Asheville or wherever it should happen to be, because after all, he's not on the campaign trail. There is some reporting from the Associated Press this morning that he may indeed do that sometime in the days ahead. My issue really is more about the absolute immediate aftermath of either a natural disaster or some other catastrophic tragedy, where I just think that all sides use it for partisan point scoring, basically. And so you get criticised if you don't go. If you do go, you get criticised for it being a photo op. Different setting, obviously, but Kamala Harris went to the border late last week. The criticism from the right was, well, she didn't spend enough time there. It's like, okay, but are people who are very critical of her border policy going to be assuaged if she spends, 5 hours there rather than 1 hour? That seems unlikely to me.
I did see some discussion, we didn't show any of it there, but from the right more broadly, I can't quite remember exactly who I saw made this point on social media, but someone did, that whenever there, how many emergency funding bills for Ukraine has Congress rubber stamped? Israel continues to get its funding as its war increases. For foreign powers, foreign interests, it's perfunctory, the approval Congress gives to the administration every single time in bipartisan fashion. When there's some domestic crisis, similar energy is not mustered to confront it by the federal government.
That may be true, and where it's true, I think it's wrong. I think that there is a separate issue from what we've been talking about the past few minutes about the efficiency of government aid and getting aid to people and getting it in where it most matters. We all remember, hell of a job, Brownie, in the aftermath of, it was Hurricane Katrina, I think, right? And that obviously affected the Bush administration. And yes, sometimes the photo op side of things can be politically damaging, as it was the case with that famous photo of Bush on Air Force One looking down on the devastation and flying over it. So I'm not saying that the political optics can't matter. Sometimes they do. I just think they're a very separate issue from the substantive aid that certainly should be given to North Carolina and anywhere else that has its people affected by this storm.
Certainly. These are, as we remarked, the two potential swing states very affected, Georgia and North Carolina. And so I'm sure the candidates are seeing how can we, spin this to our advantage? Yeah.
Well, and also just how can we
cynical fashion.
Right. And also just how can we make clear that we are here for the people in some fashion, whether that is literally and geographically there, or whether it's at least having some moral support and ideally practical support.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.
A very important number was passed on to Congress last week. That number is shocking. It's 13,000. 13,000 unauthorized immigrants with murder convictions here and overseas are living in the United States. That's according to the latest data from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. These 13,000 unauthorized immigrants are part of ICE's non-detained docket, meaning the agency has some information on the immigrants and they have pending immigration cases in the United States. They are not currently in detention because they are perhaps not prioritized for that purpose. They may already be in federal or state prison, or perhaps ICE simply cannot find them.
That's cold comfort. A spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security said the data sent to Texas GOP Congressman Gonzalez is being misinterpreted. That's what CNN claimed. DHS also told CNN that the number 13,000 goes back at least 4 decades, long before the Biden administration was in place. That also seems like cold comfort. Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Under Kamala Harris, more than 13,099 convicted murderers crossed our borders and were set free into the United States of America, so they're free to kill again," unquote. Continuing with his rhetoric, Trump wrote, quote, "But the incredible thing is that the fake news media does everything possible not to pick this story up."
I just say this. To all rapists, drug dealers, human traffickers, and murderers, welcome to America. It is important that you send a thank you note to Lion Kamala Harris, because without her, you would not be here. But we don't want you here, and you're going to get the hell out very soon. We're getting you out.
Michael Schellenberger wrote on X, quote, "No matter your politics, these are new numbers. They're shocking. Of the 7 million migrants that ICE released while their cases are being processed, 663,000 have criminal histories, 13,000 were convicted of homicide, 16,000 of sexual assault, and 1,845 facing homicide charges." So this does go back longer than the current administration. I think it's more than anything a testament to vast government incompetence to lose track of people who were on the radars of law enforcement and might have criminal backgrounds. Because look, this is what turns everyone against the idea of immigration in the first place, is when you have criminals, some violent or dangerous criminals, released into the country and nothing being done about it. And they just say, "Oh, we lost track of them." Now, some might just be serving time for other sentences, and so they are behind bars. But it is not, as I said several times during my read, I think that is not very comforting to the American people.
No, it's definitely not comforting. And look, I know I'm sitting in the nominally liberal or left-wing seat here, but there's no way I can defend that or minimize it. 13,000 people with murder convictions, 16,000 with sexual assault convictions. The quote that you read from Michael Schellenberger, I think, was quite right, that whatever one's politics, that is something to be concerned at the very minimum about. I mean, those are crazy numbers. Yes, they came in over decades. Yes, it does include people who are in fact are in prison, which I suppose, I mean, it's certainly better than them roaming around, right. But an indeterminate number are roaming around. I mean, that is just a terrifying statistic. And I think, for what it's worth, that sometimes the left takes a little bit too much refuge in things like saying, for example, well, unauthorized or illegal immigrants commit crimes at a proportionately lower rate than native-born citizens. That's true, but I don't see how it neutralizes something like this, which is pretty horrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when many Americans feel like, well, they've already committed a crime of coming in illegally, right. So there is some there should be some extra ability to do something because they're already on not so solid ground in terms of their legal standing in this country. And I don't have so much of a problem. I mean, I would like for everyone to come in legally. I would like to make it easier to do that. I want now, if your only crime is coming here illegally and you are working and you are not just a drain on the social services and you do not have a criminal background beyond that, then do I want to spend law enforcement resources to remove you from this country? No. And I think we would probably end up having to create this vast surveillance network to accomplish that. But if you have a criminal record, particularly a violent criminal record, well then yes, the government has to do something about that, or the American people clearly demand it. Look at polling numbers. Mm-hmm. This is what they want. The American people have indicated this is Donald Trump's winning issue. This is the thing where there is the most sympathy for what Republicans want to do versus where Kamala Harris and Joe Biden stand, because of the perception that not enough has been done.
I want to pick up on that point because it gets to something that I really think about a lot on this story and some other immigration stories. There's a phrase that sort of critiques, from a liberal figure, but that critiques liberals or the left or Democrats sometimes. A guy by the name of Rui Teixeira, who's a sort of think tank guy here in Washington, has a phrase about what he calls the Fox News fallacy that Democrats or liberals sometimes engage in. And it's the logical fallacy that you see quite commonly on that side, which is if Fox News is amplifying a story or concentrating on it, therefore it must be false.
There's nothing to it. Yeah.
Or therefore it must be something that people aren't concerned about. And I think that's a point or an idea that we see getting replicated again and again. 13,000 murders. There are lots of people who are genuinely concerned about that for completely obvious reasons.
Yeah, and then it gets into some granular questions. Well, why aren't these things being investigated? I mean, police have been, it depends on the municipality, but for instance, in the District of Columbia, I believe the clearance rate for violent criminal cases, I think for murders, I will need to double check this, I'm not 100% sure. I believe it has gone down somewhat significantly in the last couple of years. That could be for a variety of reasons. One is I'm only speaking for the District of Columbia, where I live and have some familiarity with. There are fewer police officers than there were before. There are some jurisdictional problems between the city and the federal government. There was a problem with the crime lab losing its certification. Anyway, these are procedural issues, government competence issues. It doesn't really need to be partisan, or it's not because, the city's Democrat run, obviously, but it's not because of some massive political conflict between Republicans or Democrats or some really deeply held partisan ideological reason that things should be run this way rather than that. It's just a matter of incompetence. It's a matter of not putting resources where they would do the most good or being hamstrung by whatever processes are in place.
Yeah, which is obviously especially dangerous when we have such a grave matter as these extremely serious crimes and people not being found exactly where people are or how they can be apprehended. And I do think just on the immigration point as it relates to that, there is, I think, look, there are people who are hostile to immigrants for all sorts of awful, horrible, unjustifiable reasons. There are xenophobes, there are racists, there are people who are nativists. There are also people who are concerned about statistics like this because they seem to speak to such a lack of, to your point, government competence and a sort of a disregard for the public safety issues that arise here. And that's a serious problem.
I want the murderers investigated and arrested and locked up regardless of whether they're immigrants or not, or they're illegal or not.
Yeah.
And, to be clear, I looked, the murders in D.C. were so high 2 years ago. Crime has come down a little bit. They were just astronomically, anomalously high either 2 or 3 years ago. And but now it's not all illegal immigrants.
No, absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
A lot of gang violence and crime typical. Now, gangs can obviously have illegal immigrant variants and strains, but it's a lot of criminal activity from the lower class, more economically borderline populations that you would suggest, and we need to confront that problem.
Yes, we are anti-murder rather than anti-immigrant.
Anti-murder. We're charting bold new stances here on Rising.
Strongly
I'm against murder. I don't care. Who knows? More Rising right after this. Middle East is roiling. So much has happened in the last 48 hours. The escalation of violence between Israel and Iran-backed proxies across the Middle East threatens to bring both sides closer to all-out regional war. Now let's recap. Israel struck multiple fronts, including a long-distance attack on Yemen. Israel warplanes flew more than 1,000 miles to attack power plants and shipping facilities run by the Iranian-backed Houthis. Then Israel bombed Beirut on Friday night and killed the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Nasrallah was the political, militant, and spiritual leader of the Iranian-backed group. He was considered by his followers to be invincible, having eluded Israel for 32 years, but not anymore. He was also responsible for victory over the IDF with the war with Israel in 2006.
Intense bombing over the weekend has now displaced 1 million Lebanese. Let's not forget Gaza, where Hamas is coming up on a year at war with Israel. Israel struck Gaza again as well this weekend. Israeli military officials said no decision had been made on a major ground operation into Lebanon, but some analysts believe it is imminent. Netanyahu said Sunday that his goal is to create a new balance of power in the Middle East in which Israel's status is unquestioned.
And Netanyahu released a video this morning addressed directly to the Iranian people, saying that his quarrel, Israel's fight, is not with the people of Iran, but with their regime, etc., etc. This is a major escalation of the war. I feel like we've been saying that a lot lately.
Right.
Nasrallah being taken out. Israel is very committed to the elimination of enemies, and it is doing so with, I would say, less and less regard for civilian destruction that occurs in pursuit of that goal. That their willingness to tolerate civilian deaths has gotten much higher, and that must have something to do with the U.S. government declining to push back or rein in Israel's government whatsoever. Biden and Harris are letting Netanyahu do whatever he wants to a greater extent than any previous president, Democrat or Republican, and that is having an effect.
I mean, I just think the thing is a catastrophe top to bottom, really, politically, strategically, morally, arguably kicked off. I'll get into difficulties here because it's a long conflict that has taken part in that part of the world. The attack of October 7th clearly marked a new phase and sparked what has ensued since then. What has ensued since then has been the Israelis killing approximately 40,000 people in Gaza and now expanding the war. During the time that has happened, they have received enormous support from the United States, politically, militarily, diplomatically. And that support has been couched in the terms that there are certain strategic objectives that Biden has, and none of them have been accomplished. The provision of widespread aid into Gaza, the reduction of civilian casualties, trying to avoid the war escalating in a regional way. All of those things have failed, and we keep hearing these reports that President Biden is really very angry. He's very annoyed, and that just keeps getting stated over and over again, and he keeps shipping bombs to Israel.
Yeah, that's the tension here, and it doesn't make any sense to me. We could just, look, if they don't have, if the Biden administration doesn't care or supports what Israel is doing, they could just say that. They can't say that because there would be too many angry progressives. And I don't know, maybe it's not true. Maybe they do care. But they're not doing anything about it if they do care, and we do have tremendous leverage. We give them all the support. If there's like quadrants here, like we should support them and we should tell them what to do. We should support them and not tell them what to do. We should not support them and tell them what to do, or we should not support them and not tell them what to do. I'm in the we should not support them and not tell them what to do quadrant. I would take the position that this is their war, and Israel has determined that this is necessary to its safety and security, and it was attacked horrifically by terrorist organizations, but it's really their problem, not ours, that our support, our financial support, might be emboldening them beyond what is actually in their own best interest, and if that's the case, I don't want to be a part of it, and it harms U.S. security because we are blamed for the things that goes on. But I don't necessarily want to second guess it, but I don't want to be involved. I think that's where many of the American people are. That is not where its government is.
Well, what I would argue about that point is to say, I would rather not be involved and it's up to the Israelis to do what they like. If we weren't involved, the Israelis logistically and militarily couldn't do what they're doing. So a suspension of American support, well, I agree, fine. I mean, I think that if American support was pulled back, I would argue that would plainly have the consequence of curbing a lot of the most egregious behavior on the part of Israel, on the part of the IDF, where they feel that they can act with relative impunity and still rely upon almost continual United States support, which I think is wrong morally, and I think it's wrong politically.
You know more about this region of the world than I do. What is the reaction to this now deaths of top Hezbollah leader, someone who'd been in power there for 30 years? how is Iran's leadership going to respond?
Well, in terms of the Hezbollah issue and the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, I see that there's now an acting leader of Hezbollah. That person is out saying, essentially, the struggle continues. And
didn't the immediate replacement get killed as well?
I think there was
replacement number.
There was a Hamas. The major Hamas guy in Lebanon, which gets confusing because people think Hamas, Gaza, Hezbollah, Lebanon. The senior Hamas guy in Lebanon also got killed, I believe. But in terms of the whole theory behind this, I don't think in general terms killing the leader of radical groups tends to destroy that group. I mean, those groups are products of an ideology. It is certainly the case that in Hezbollah's instance, it is very dependent upon aid from Iran. Iran isn't going to back away from this. They're going to keep supporting Hezbollah. They think there is a strategic reason to do that.
Although they've not been thrilled with all of Hezbollah's actions.
Right, and there's a danger because they want tension with Israel, but not all-out direct war between the two sides. And so there's this very dangerous game about trying to manage a conflict that involves violent actions but doesn't involve, for the most part, Israel bombing Tehran or Tehran bombing Tel Aviv. It's a very, very high-risk situation.
Yeah, there are members of Congress who've said, just go ahead and bomb Iran, who would the hawks in both parties really that want an actual all-out confrontation with Iran that I think would just be totally catastrophic.
Oh yeah, and I mean John Bolton, to name one, seems to want to bomb Iran at every available opportunity and has done for about a decade or more. I think that kind of belligerence is unhelpful. I think there's a whole separate conversation you can have about what actions Iran takes and who it supports and violent groups that it supports. But this idea that the United States can just sort of careen around the world, either sending military in or supporting foreign militaries or bombing places, I think that is ill-advised.
Yes, I do as well. It's certainly hurting the Democratic Party right now because it's a difficult coalition they have to keep going, and I'm baffled by the lack of strategy being articulated every day. That well, we don't like what they're doing, but we're not going to do anything about it. And it just that seems to be the weakest position of all. That we're against it, but we're not going to lift a finger to stop it.
And very directionless and doesn't assuage any of the people on either side of the Democratic coalition or beyond it. Because what you're saying is, we don't approve of this action that we're going to facilitate by assisting the people who are taking those actions. It seems to make no sense in that regard.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this. Remember the old adage that real men don't eat quiche? I actually had never heard that before, but I guess it's a thing. Jen Psaki might also have something to say about it in her fawning interview on MSNBC with Vice President Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff. She applauded Emhoff's approach to being a man. Let's watch.
Important part, an interesting part of how people have talked about your role here is how your role has reshaped the perception of masculinity. And I'm not sure you planned on that, but you are an incredibly supportive spouse. Has that been an evolution for you? And do you think that's part of the role you might play as First Gentleman?
It's funny, I've started to think a lot about this. I've always been like this. My dad was like this.
People on X went on to mock Jen Psaki. One user wrote, "We don't have journalists in mainstream media. We have prostitutes for their pimp the DNC." Jen Psaki blasted for saying Doug Emhoff reshaped perceptions of masculinity. And another person wrote, "Is this not funny or what? Jen Psaki's been slammed after praising Doug Emhoff, 59, for reshaping the perception of masculinity, even after it was exclusively revealed that he had an affair with his children's nanny."
The former press secretary for both Presidents Obama and Biden turned pundit also asked Emhoff about topics such as anti-Semitism. The media landscape on both sides seemed to be clouded by pundits who are formerly part of one of the two main parties. So can we take any of these interviews seriously? What do you think, Robby?
Yeah, I don't. How has he changed perceptions of masculinity? What am I missing?
I think it is
because he's a supportive husband.
I think it's the idea that she has, as it were, the prime primary role, at least in career terms, and he has the secondary role. He is, as far as we can tell, a supportive husband, and that's a good thing. I mean, I'm not sure that it is that shocking to American people who, in many households, the female is the main breadwinner or has the higher paid job or more prominent job. But, you know, good for him. Potentially the first gentleman of the United States.
Yeah, I don't. In my list of 100 different problems I have with Kamala Harris, they're almost entirely policy related, and they have nothing to do with her relationship with Doug Emhoff, which seems like a nice relationship and whatever. I don't care if she has a family or not. And also, I don't really care. Although, so people were making a lot of the, well, is he this really a role model as a spouse, given the whatever happened between in his previous marriage, but. You know, marriages are messy, and I don't really care about that either. I don't know that he's Jen Psaki, I just didn't understand what she was saying. Is it like he's not... Are we already past this, that traditional masculinity is alive in some contexts and dead in others, and some people are more masculine than others, and no one really cares anymore? And
yeah, I mean, I thought, I do have an issue with the frequency with which we now have this conveyor belt that puts press secretaries or political activists from either of the major parties, like I said in the introduction, into these
really
purportedly journalistic roles. And then obviously they have an in with all the people in their own party who they then bring on for these pretty soft, focused interviews.
It's very soft, very fluffy. I mean, I don't know how hard you can do an interview with the spouse,
right.
Which I would say the same thing if it was a male spouse or a female spouse. It's not like hard-hitting interviews are being done with Melania Trump or even like Michelle Obama or whatever. And though Michelle had more of a somewhat of a policy role, at least with lunches and nutrition. Remember all that? Not that I thought her ideas were very good either.
There's a surprise.
I mean, you know, she wasn't.
We can defend Michelle.
She wasn't
Obama
deploying
lunches.
quiche into the lunch boxes of all, you know, probably. You know, sapping the masculine energies of our young people with quiche being deployed.
I'm very glad that I can
What is quiche?
That I can reassert quiche is terrible food. So I'm glad that I can take pride in my masculinity and being anti-quiche.
It's like spinach
kind of
and
eggs
egg?
and spinach. Yeah, the thing I don't like about it is texture is very sort of fluffy. I'm not pro quiche.
It's like a cake.
Well, I am anti-murder, as we were saying earlier on,
Anti-murder.
also anti-quiche.
Okay, yeah. I guess I'm not a big fan either, although I like egg-based things. Oh,
yeah.
Speaking of eggs, here's something totally random I can pull into this conversation.
Go for it.
It is a speaking of eggs. I saw there is a random tweet by someone quoting J.D. Vance. He apparently had said that his 2 young sons eat about 14 eggs every single morning. And Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC responds to that, well, that would be 14 eggs per day, 98 eggs per week, 2 children consuming 8+ dozen eggs per week. Like, it's like a fact check.
Of his eggs. Of
obviously, okay, when I've said I'm so hungry I could eat a horse.
Right. You don't
Are you going to come fact check me? I'm not actually capable of eating a horse.
Right.
This is very... very stupid.
Yeah, no, they do get into crazy areas with all of that stuff. There was also a story at the weekend that was kind of controversial, and I'll try to give both sides. J.D. Vance showed up in some diner or restaurant in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. He
seeking more eggs for his children.
Probably keeping that egg supply going.
Yeah.
The manager apparently freaked out because Vance arrived unannounced with Secret Service and all that, and it became a thing because people on the right were saying he had been barred from this restaurant where other Democratic candidates had been allowed in, and the restaurant was saying, no, it's only a matter of confusion, and that became a whole thing. What we really need to know is the egg consumption, which I'm not aware of in that particular restaurant.
We need to really solve that one. Fact checkers, get on it. I want to know exactly how many eggs are eaten in the Vance household every morning. And do not rest until this information is obtained.
And are they in quiches, which is obviously the important thing, or are they actually general eggs in a more orthodox fashion?
Yeah, then there's no masculinity if it's a quiche.
In the Vance household, there's too much quiche.
Too much quiche. All right, I think we've said all we can say on this topic and then some. More rising right after this.
Family values and the meaning of family are important issues for many in America. They've even become a presidential talking point in a sense. Ohio Senator and Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, previously disparaged America's, quote, childless cat ladies. That could have a big impact in the race. In the meantime, here's what Vance said back in June.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact.
That mindset have perhaps influenced a Republican candidate running in a competitive race for an open seat in Virginia's 7th District? We're talking about Derek Anderson, and he borrowed this family to sit as his own wife and daughters for repeated photo ops, according to the New York Times. Anderson has shared photos of him posing with the wife and children of one of his friends to apparently appear like they are his own family, including one image of them all around a dining table.
Anderson has not yet appeared to comment on these photos, but he didn't. Okay, we play a little defense here, I guess. He didn't claim it was his family.
I mean, Robby, you're stretching a little bit.
Am I?
And nobody would have seen the photos that we just showed there and thought that's some guy just hanging out with his friend's family, which would be even weirder. No?
What? I don't know. I don't think it'd be weird. What would be weird?
Well, it would be weird to use in one's campaign literature or on a website a photo which is you surrounded by an adult woman and several younger girls in what clearly appears to be a family pose, it's just like your friends.
I don't know. I think it's okay to be. I mean, I've never run for office, so I don't know what kind of campaign literature I'd run with. But I think it's fine to have friends who have kids or are married and take pictures with them. And I looked it up. So he is engaged to be married. He's not currently married. I guess he, in some ways it'd be weirder if he had his fiance and then some random kids. Right. But instead it's just, photos with family friends or neighbors or something. I don't see the problem. I think
you're doing a heroic job trying to play devil's advocate, but I think this is pretty dodgy. I think, what it speaks to my mind, is this idea, which I actually find quite sad, that a person running for election thinks that the fact that they are not married, though he is, as you say, engaged, and doesn't have children, that those would be politically detrimental things. I think that's genuinely unfortunate if he does feel that way. It seems pretty clear to me that he does, because I think those photos are very intentionally staged, really, to give that impression.
We haven't elected a lot of single people to the presidency, of course. I think it was just... was Grover Cleveland, right, who got married in the White House?
I think so. Isn't Grover Cleveland the one who is speculated to actually be the first gay president?
No. That's oh yeah, you're right. He was a bachelor. Buchanan.
Buchanan, yeah.
Buchanan was right. He was like real close friends with the previous vice president or whatever who died. Yeah, no, you're right. He was not married at all. I believe Grover Cleveland got married while he was in the White House. And then, of course, he's not the only person to get married. Woodrow Wilson was married, his wife died, and then he got remarried again while he was in the White House. Maybe that was Grover Cleveland's deal, too. I don't think so. But Buchanan was the one who was, a bachelor, and probably because he was gay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing, getting back to this Republican candidate, is you would think that at this time in our social history, where we are rightly, in my view, so accepting of all kinds of things, that it wouldn't be detrimental to be a person who's engaged and has no children. And I think that it is unfortunate that he seems to have an issue with that. There is polling, and Gallup has polled for a long time, questions about whether people would vote for people who fall under various categories. And for a long time, rather to my disappointment, because I'm not a religious person, atheist has been one of the biggest categories that would bar people.
We can't have the godless in government. We can't have that, Niall.
We can't let them in. It seems such a bizarre thing to be unaccepting of when we are.
It is the number one thing that are removed.
Lots of other things.
Yeah, I mean, also not a particularly religious and single, and I don't have children. I don't have a cat. I guess I would be an unappealing political figure, but oh well. If that's just what the people want, that's what the people want.
You could perhaps borrow.
I could borrow some. Yeah,
I got a photo shoot that.
I got lots of friends with kids. I just steal my brother, his kids, his wife for a nice little photo op. I'm like, Caitlin, bring the girls over here. You don't know what this is for. Selfie.
I think maybe Uncle Robby might be a
Robbie. That's going to give me away.
Uncle Robby would be fine. That would be better, I think, than borrowing your friend's kids.
This was part of an article, right, by the New York Times about how GOP candidates looking to soften their image turn to their wives, which is about because they all have very strong pro-life positions, and this gender split is emerging, even as race is depolarizing as an issue, because you have Republicans and Donald Trump, at least on paper, at least on polling-wise, we'll see what it actually comes to, doing better with racial minorities than they've done in many other cycles, but more of a gender split emerging in how the parties are perceived by the genders, gender split, and then also the major split just being income and education, now increasingly being correlated with Democratic politics, where it was not before.
And that has been a concern in Republican politics for a long time. I've been doing this long enough that I remember talking to Kellyanne Conway long before she was a Trump advisor. She was a Republican pollster. And Kellyanne's niche in that industry for a long time was advising Republican candidates on how to talk, particularly about abortion, but about women's issues in a way that was not alienating to them. I don't know if she would advise them to have these unusual photos that this gentleman has, but certainly the idea of trying to not alienate female voters in the suburbs is obviously important.
She has the most warped family situation of all. Right. Actually, we talked about this on Rising last week.
We can bring George in to chat about it.
Right. That her and her daughter did this interview for Fox Nation, talking about their different politics. That it was actually nice to see, because they had been so angry and at odds, and it was like we're all being dragged into the family drama of the Conways against our will. So I was happy to see they've patched things up enough to have a civil conversation, Kellyanne and the daughter.
No, and if they can have a civil conversation about differences, that's all to the good.
Very nice. All right, we will not throw any fake family photos at you today. More Rising right after this.
It seems like figures on the far right don't even know how to react to some of their own these days. Tucker Carlson spoke with actress and comedian Roseanne Barr during his live special last week and said he was freaked out when Barr echoed the entirely false claim that liberals like the taste of human blood. But Carlson insisted that she was not crazy. Take a look.
It's going to be the emperor went to Epstein Island and ate people. And you know they do that. You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
So it's not just the dogs and the cats, not just the pets.
It's not just the dogs and the cats. They're full-on vampires. And everybody still thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. They're full-on vampires. They love the taste of human flesh, and they drink human blood. They do, Tucker. Stop staring at me like that.
You're freaking me out, man. Because you spent your life in the entertainment business, so I think you have some authority on this.
This moment raises a good question, which is how far are right-wing media personalities willing to go in their support for former President Donald Trump? Robby.
Yeah, I think this is more just a cautionary tale in taking entertainment figures too seriously. Roseanne is an actress and comedian who has been known for saying controversial and sensational and incorrect things for decades. It's only been a problem. It's only been unconscionable. It's only resulted in her being unpersoned from the face of the earth when all of those things took on a right-wing valence, as they have in recent years. Yeah, I think she's crazy, but I've always thought she was crazy, and that didn't really stop me from enjoying some of her comedy to the extent I enjoyed it, although I was never really a big fan of the Roseanne show or anything like that. But it was all fine. She was known for she's been saying crazy things forever. And then she became a right-wing figure, and now those crazy things are not acceptable. So, whatever. You shouldn't be looking to her for truth, but you shouldn't have been looking to her for truth before.
Well, I agree with that part. I just think I've mixed feelings about her because she has actually talked about mental illness and suffering from mental illness before. So I worry that she's actually a crazy person, and so I don't want to get into the sort of mocking the afflicted kind of situation, but I do think it's kind of absurd for even figures like Tucker to give a platform to people like that, who there's always the danger that she's going to come out with this just nutty stuff. And I don't really see what the purpose is. Yes, you can argue that, we can bring people into the conversation, or she is a celebrity, but it's ultimately just having someone who seems to me quite unwell on a public stage talking complete nonsense. I mean, that's a person that if you met Roseanne, as she was in that clip, in a bar or a coffee shop or a restaurant, you would move away from a person who is clearly pretty troubled.
Well, I mean, clearly not. People think she's funny. They've thought she's funny for a long time. She's actually told one of my, I've referenced this on the show, she told one of my favorite jokes ever. I have it. It was made into like a TikTok or something. I saved it on my phone because then it got deleted. And it's one of the funniest jokes I've ever heard. So she has some talent, but yeah, she says crazy things. I don't know if she actually believes them or not. I don't think there's much evidence of the mass consumption of human babies by other human beings, let alone liberals or something of that nature. But you know, but I can look up all the crazy things she said over the year when she was in good standing with the mainstream media and the entertainment community, and I have to think there's something a little bit sketchy about that. But you say about platforming, again, she's an entertainment figure. I would never say, like, don't have on some performance artist kind of... I mean, I would say to the audience, don't take what she says seriously, because it's not serious and it's not true. But I wouldn't say that to be entertained by her. Some people think she's funny. Would I pay for a ticket to that? No. Yeah. But if you do, you do.
I know you do, you do. I take the point that she did used to be a very progressive figure. I had completely forgotten. I mean, I remember her from the big show and her being a star when I was a much younger man than I am now. But I had forgotten that she actually did seek the Green Party nomination on one occasion. And she was a very progressive figure. And she actually contended at one point that an NBC show, I believe it was, that had been in the pilot stage and got cancelled because she was too progressive and too left-wing.
Fox News came for her in 2009 when she did like some Hitler photo shoot thing.
For a Jewish satirical magazine, I believe.
Right, she got attacked for anti-Semitism.
She is Jewish, I believe, right?
I don't know. Yeah, she might be. But then the big thing that she got canceled for was a racist joke about Valerie Jarrett, the Obama advisor, whom she likened to an ape. Which,
I mean, that's just appalling.
Well, obviously it is appalling. However, she said, and I believe her, that she did not know that Valerie Jarrett was black.
I mean, I don't know if our producers have a photo of Valerie Jarrett there. I mean,
I don't think she knows what she looked like. I don't think she had any idea who. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't think she's a very well-informed person. That was her explanation, is that she had no idea what the person looked like. And
that just seems nonsense.
Well,
I mean, I understand that is what she said, and you're reporting what she said, but it seems crazy to assume that you would be moved to comment upon Valerie Jarrett in a way that was about her appearance and somehow fail to register that she's black.
She also apologized for it. She said, I didn't know it, and I apologize. And she still lost her TV show over it. And at the time, I thought that was a pretty punitive thing to do to a long-standing, controversial comedian-type figure, again, who did a Hitler photo shoot, who did all of these things, and now you've criticized an Obama official, and now you can no longer have a TV show.
The point is,
it seemed very selective to me.
It's not criticizing an Obama official. It's making a racist joke against a black woman who is prominent because she worked for Obama. That's not saying, you know, Robert Gibbs is an ineffective press secretary or something. It's something much worse than that.
I mean, if she said something nasty about Robert Gibbs' appearance or Donald Trump's appearance or anything, I would probably feel similarly that this is just what a trash-talking comedian. Again, you should not seek political truth from celebrities in general.
Right.
I am not endorsing anything she said. I'm just like, I also don't care that much. I also think people have, at least people in this category were treated as having had the right to make broad and offensive comments, and we've moved some of these boundaries in some of these ways over time, and I don't know, she suffered because of it, and then she became even crazier and even more right-wing because this is what happened to her. So maybe that's a lesson in enforcing cancel culture so vigorously that you end up turning this person that you know, if you think their views or their platform or whatever is dangerous, you make them into an even greater monster, which seems to be what a occurred here.
Well, or the dynamics of the kind of current media moment and pop culture moment create that whole sense of audience capture where you get a certain amount of attention for being, in her case now, very right-wing, and you go further and further and further out there, and before you know where you are, you're on stage with Tucker Carlson talking about people eating babies. The other depressing part of that clip that we played was the applause that was receiving in the audience. I'm not sure that those people were amused. They may have been entertained in a different way, but it seemed as if they were sort of cheering her on. I just find the whole sort of scenario pretty dispiriting.
I don't know, isn't it? Maybe it's more like wrestling, where the people watching know it's fake and they're cheering and it's part of the performance of it.
I have been at Trump rallies where he does the thing about, fake news media, and that is a really interesting situation because roughly half the crowd take it seriously and are quite, angry, and about half the crowd do seem to think of it as wrestling or pantomime. So I take that point. I just feel everything about the Roseanne story just is dispiriting.
Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, now available anywhere you can find podcasts. And I will be back here tomorrow. Thanks for watching.